I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Mosaic of Wine Series 2, giving you my audience of wine lovers, students and professionals from around the world access to some of the most interesting, successful and influential people working in and around wine today. Today's guest, Liz Mercer, grew up in the Napa Valley and following a stint in Michigan, returned and joined the wine industry as a temp in a tasting room in 1999, later moving into direct-to-consumer sales, where she would help establish one of the largest wine clubs in the country. Over 25 years, she's held various leadership roles with wineries on the Central Coast and the Napa Valley, and just last year, she left day-to-day winery operations and joined Wise full-time as a partner and DTC coach. Liz takes us through her origin story around leaving Napa Valley, working her way up from the bottom in Michigan, before making a successful return. We get into the Napa Valley wine culture, talk Enotourism changes over time. Liz explains the platinum rule. We talk taught versus learned hospitality and mass customization, discussing the differences between collaborative and competitive strategies. We talk international direct-to-consumer before discussing some direct-to-consumer winery resources. Enjoy.
So I had a rather unique upbringing. I had the opportunity, I lived here in the Napa Valley until I was about 14. And through a series of unfortunate events with a mentally unstable parent, I all of a sudden lived in Detroit, Michigan, of all places. And so I had this going from Napa Valley, where it was stunningly beautiful, where people traveled from all over the world to see where I lived, to living in a very rough neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan. And it was a shock, to say the least. And I ended up spending about 8 years in Michigan, my high school and college years. When I graduated college, I had this opportunity, this fork in the road. Do I go back to Napa Valley for the proverbial 6 months and see if I can make a go of it? Or do I take the safer route and accept the job in the Detroit metro area in the financial services and start building a book of business and maybe visit Napa Valley occasionally? And I took the risk. I went to Napa Valley. I don't think we'd be talking if I was still in financial services.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, again, sort of, I guess, through adversity and maybe, a little bit the kind of fork in the road that you didn't take, would it be okay to just give us get a fairly high level overview of, what were maybe some of the, I guess, traditional skills that you'd maybe acquired, through that important period when you were in Detroit?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. One, the very first one is, as soon as I landed in Detroit, I needed income. And what's a 14-year-old to do but to lie about her age and get a job working in a greasy spoon diner, you just do what you got to do, scrappy. And so I learned hard work at a very, very young age, making, $2 an hour mopping floors on a Saturday morning at a greasy spoon, which was probably one of the most disgusting things I've ever done in my career. But then my college years had a profound impact. And there I learned finance and economics, which were my majors. And I thought, well, this is a solid foundation. I can go out, even if I don't go into financial services, a degree in finance and a minor in economics, I'll be pretty well set.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's and again, it's I think you hinted that if you ever write your autobiography, you'll really kind of go into the story. But I think it feels as though it's been let's say formative, and it's certainly meant that you've grown up very quickly. I think that's paraphrasing what you've said there.
Yeah, and it gave me incredible perspective living in the Midwest and, going to the local grocery stores and not seeing wines that were the families that I grew up with in the Napa Valley, knowing what else was out there yet wasn't on our grocery store shelves. But then also living in the Midwest for 8 years really gave me insight into, the world was not Napa Valley. It was a very diverse and very broad and beautiful, beautiful place, but it was not all Napa Valley.
And this is it. And I'm guessing that having grown up in the Napa Valley, even though you were only 14, not a drinking age, but I'm guessing I've
Technically not a drinking age.
I've never had the pleasure of visiting, and I would just love to understand a little bit around the the influence of wine that's around you. I mean, is it does it literally kind of seep into you from every corner? Does it feel as though that that wine influence and that wine tradition is kind of all around you?
Yeah, absolutely. You never realized who the kids you were going to school with, that their parents were a famous wine grower or
Mm,
winemaker or struggling winery owner. That never really hit, but yet there was always wine on the table. And even today, I just had dinner with friends last night, and their kids were there, and there was wine on the table, and the people sitting around the table were just iconic, and still are to this day. But you don't even think about it. It's
mm,
just,
mm.
your neighbor or the person that you see at the park while you're walking your dog. Um, it permeates every aspect of your life. And I feel so incredibly fortunate to have that and to be surrounded by that every day.
Yeah, yeah. It's you're taking me back to a trip to Rioja a few years ago, and just walking with a winemaker friend down the Calle Laurel in Logroño, which is a very famous tapas street, and it's everything is small, everything is kind of as it was. You just people are outside, and when you're a winemaker there, you don't get more than 3 meters or so before you see another winemaker that sort of pulls you over and wants to discuss something or other. It's one of those things where your free time, you're still surrounded by other winemakers, and you're talking about wine. But I think exactly as you say there, they're your friends. You look them up, and they're iconic winemakers, but they're just your friends. They're the people that you see every
Yeah.
day, and when you go out for tapas or go out for a drink somewhere.
Yeah. I've always said at the end of the day, we're just fancy farmers.
I love that. I love that, and I think that's as well something that has always really drawn me to winemakers. I would say I remember being very surprised at the start of interpreting wine about how winemakers don't talk about wine the same way that sommeliers do. I remember interviewing my first
Mhm.
winemaker and expecting them to give me the full bouquet and give me the 3D description of how it was smelling and how it was looking. And sometimes you just get something as simple as it's pretty good, isn't it? Those are probably
I
my
ha-
favorite.
Oh, I have a hilarious story about this. I worked for a sparkling wine house for a number of years, and we had this phenomenally passionate winemaker that I had the pleasure of working with, and who has since retired. But we had wine club members in, and we were talking about the wine, and then the brand was more about the lifestyle and more
Mm.
about including it. And he was explaining secondary fermentation, and he was explaining, and then the yeast cells guts explode, and I was like, oh, maybe we should work on that talking point. But I didn't wanna throttle or capture that passion that was coming through.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm sure they felt it, through that visceral moment. So yeah, let's pick up the story then.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're at that fork in the road, and what does it then look like coming back to Napa? I think you've said there for 6 months to give it a go.
Yeah, I was gonna see if I could make a go of it and just what would happen, and
Hmm.
so I couch surfed, I did what I had to do, to just break into the wine industry. And at the time, so this is, late '90s, and the tasting rooms, the direct to consumer wasn't necessarily a career path. It was often a stepping stone into something else. And I thought, well, I'll start there. And
Hmm.
so I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm so embarrassed if I think back to those early days. But I started as a temporary employee in a tasting room. And at the end of the day, we'd served 1,000 guests from all over the world. And we had a glass of wine and talked about what we did and how we would do it better tomorrow. And I
Hmm.
remember sitting there and I said, a girl could get used to this. And I never looked back. I never once considered anything other than wine since then. And that's been 25 years.
And that experience you're describing there, in terms of giving, as you say, as a decent number of people a great experience. That was the first winery that you worked in Napa.
That was, yeah. And I just
Okay.
had the pleasure of going back. They just underwent a major remodel. and I revisited and walked those old halls and those old steps with some of my family members, and it was incredible to see how far the winery has come, and where the wine world has gone in those 25 years.
Yeah, and I think actually, I would ask you to kind of almost relive some of the some of those earlier experiences. We will bring this right up to date, but again, I hear a lot, and I kind of I intuit that um, that enotourism and the sort of
Mhm.
on-site experience in Napa Valley is kind of famed the world over. So yeah, I just wonder if you'd kind of take us into could it be like a typical kind of weekend, but equally when there were special events, or when you really had to
Mhm.
kind of up your game. What do they sort of look like? Maybe contrasting the two really to give us a more of a deeper flavor of just what the experience is like there.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the thing that sticks out to me is not so much as an insular moment, but
Hmm.
more as a progression and an evolution. And if you think back to how even you and I used to consume media,
Hmm.
10 years ago or 15 years ago, or when we were kids, we used to get up and run across the room and turn the channel on the TV
I remember.
because there
Yeah.
were no remote controls when we were kids. And then to eventually there was a remote control, and then there was, a video store and Blockbuster,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then DVDs and mail, and now streaming, and you can watch anything you want, anytime you want.
Yeah.
The same thing has happened in the wine industry.
Mm, mm,
And so the wineries that are doing well have really evolved to meet their guests' needs, and have really not stayed doing the way that they were doing things
mhm,
years ago. And I remember, there have been definitely pivotal moments where it was like, "Ooh, we have to change the way we're doing something." Obviously, the pandemic was a huge driver of that, and we really had to reevaluate how we were doing things. And the big move to going to more by appointment only tasting
mm,
experiences,
mhm,
where I guess used to be able to go to maybe 5 wineries a day with hopefully a lunch break in the middle, tasting 4 or 5 wineries, walk up to the bar, 5 or 6 people deep at the bar, pay their tasting fees, taste 5 wines in quick succession, and then drive up the road to the next winery.
mhm,
It's now become much more curated, and on the winery side, much more orchestrated. So the guest is maybe visiting 3 wineries a day
mhm,
and is
mhm,
having longer, much more intimate experiences with their wine host and tasting the same 5 or 6 wines, but they're hearing stories, they're maybe walking in a vineyard, they're having a much different experience. And if for us, we've been able to track this and watch conversion to purchase metrics improve,
mhm, mhm,
conversion to wine
mhm,
club metrics improve, guest loyalty really improve
mhm.
by building the experience. So that I wouldn't say it's one moment. I would say it's been definitely much more evolutionary.
And I love the comparison with media.
Mhm.
It is actually a comparison that I use a lot when I'm talking about our issues in the wine industry around attracting younger drinkers, and
Yeah.
what does that look like? And if we look at how people are consuming media, it's almost a one for one kind of trajectory with how they're consuming, let's say, beverages. It's not even only
Mhm.
alcoholic beverages. They will sort of be less faithful, let's say, to that single beverage. They will be trying different things. And but I almost, again, I love that, the way you've described it there in terms of, can you remember when we didn't have the remote control? I still remember, well, our first TV had a dial,
Mhm.
and was black and white, so it's like
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
kind of relics, and these things that, as you say, remember from our childhood. um uh,
Yeah.
Sorry, did you?
Well, it
Yeah.
always yeah, I was gonna say, it always amazes me that there are wineries out there that are still taking that approach as though we were on black and white TVs turning the dial,
Yeah.
instead of meeting our guests where they are and letting them participate with our brand how they want to participate. We've been barraged. The media example, absolutely, but then also look at even Burger King has been telling us, "You can have it your way. Now
Mm-hmm.
have your sandwich your way." Everything has been telling us it's all about us, and yet the wine industry wants to tell you, otherwise sometimes. So I think there needs to be an evolution in our industry to meet guests where they are.
Okay, and I'm keen to just sort of capture your firsthand experiences, though. Of, that we're kind of still I guess in the journey where this is back in, I guess, 25 years or so ago in Napa
Yeah.
Valley. What else? Are there any things that you remember? And you can look back, I guess, fondly and with hindsight now, where you can kind of identify and say these were kind of, potentially black and white, or non remote control things that we were doing, which maybe have phased out over time.
Yeah, I think, they still exist. And keep in mind, I still, I travel to probably a good 5 or 6 states a year
Mm.
evaluating wine experiences.
Hmm.
And I think you need to be true to your brand. And there are absolutely experiences that work in regions that I wouldn't change at all.
Hmm.
But I do think that we need to be able to offer a little bit more than just one offer. And so I, still to
Mm.
this day see wineries doing what they were doing. I and every so it's some of them, it's really charming that they haven't changed and they haven't evolved, and that's what's working for them. Uh, and there are a number of wineries that I love that type of experience. But then there are others that have. There was actually a pivotal moment for me, even before that. That was in
Hmm.
college, my very, very first day of college, and I had a professor, an economics professor, um, who was very well known. And on the first day of my freshman year of econ, 101, he gives a lecture and he says, "Do you all remember the golden rule from kindergarten?" And I'll ask
Mm.
you, do you
Hmm.
remember the
Hmm.
golden rule from kindergarten? You know, which is treat others as you want to be treated.
Yeah.
And he said, it just doesn't work in business. And he said, you have to go beyond the golden rule into the platinum rule, which is treating others the way that they want to be treated, to be truly successful, to be talking to your customers, to having those meaningful relationships
Mm.
with them.
Mm.
And
Mm.
this was before I ever even thought of going into wine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And an
Yeah.
economics professor, who had been teaching for 30 years was telling us, what you learned in kindergarten was wrong. You need to not treat others the way that you want to be treated. You need to focus on their needs, ask them what's important to them, and treat them the way that they want to be treated through the platinum rule. And so I've always embraced that. And every time I see it in a winery, I get so excited, whether it's as simple as on the reservation form, are we
Mm.
celebrating anything
Mm.
special today?
Mm.
Are
Mm.
there any dietary restrictions we should know
Hmm.
about? What are you most looking forward to tasting with us today? Uh, right up at the reservation and getting to know me, and then allowing me to tell you what I want. And when they recognize that, it's the littlest things, but I get so excited.
I absolutely love that, and again, we're in perfect sync, because yeah, I knew, we when we spoke before turning on the mic, I know you mentioned the platinum rule, which I'm so excited really to hear about and to share, because yeah, we've heard of the golden rule, we've heard of the silver rule, don't treat
Mhm,
others how you don't want to be treated yourself. But
mhm,
the that is just so insightful. I think the platinum rule, and exactly that. It's okay. That then maybe the people will think, oh, that sounds like a lot of hard work. To read somebody's mind almost, and figure out how do they want to be treated. They're sort of coming in cold off the streets there, and presumably, yeah, you can do it through a form, or you can do it through digital
mhm,
means, but you know, I guess as well, there's also an element of just relating to people, reading
mhm,
people, and maybe one or two sort of test questions, just to sort of figure out where people are, right, and kind of where
yeah.
where their energy level is, and where their interest is.
Yeah, as simple as asking, what brings you in today? What are you most excited about? What do you know about us? Let's start with that.
Yeah.
And then go from there and engage in a two-way dialogue. I think it was, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly
Mm.
Effective People. I think he's the one who coined the term 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion. We should be listening twice as much as we're talking. And so I really, really enjoyed that with guests.
Yeah, yeah, and I think let's do your story justice as well. Let's sort of, I guess, pick up the timeline, because I think from what I've seen, this will then bring in some other really important cultural influences on your journey. So yeah,
Mhm.
take us through, I guess, yeah, that first experience back in Napa Valley, and where did that eventually lead you to?
Yeah, so I figured out pretty quickly that I definitely wanted to be in the wine industry. And the winery that I was a temp with, so every day you didn't know if you were working the next day. And they could call you off your shift or they could, reassign you. And so there was an opening that came in and eventually and I took it. I applied for it and got the position. So now I was actually employed by a winery, and that was a momentous occasion. Like I felt legitimate, like I'm really working for a winery instead of just maybe I'll be working tomorrow. And then there were some other opportunities, and every chance that came along, I jumped on it. Somebody was going on maternity leave. Could I step in for, a
Mm-hmm.
couple of months with trade hospitality? Had no idea what that meant. And I'm like, sure, let's do it. What do I have to do? There was an opportunity to move into wine club. And this was in the days before websites were as robust as they are now. Although I will definitely argue there are some winery websites that are about what I started working with in the early 2000s. But there were definitely some, the opportunity to go into wine club and learn how to launch websites and learn how to develop e-commerce with wineries. Anytime there was that opportunity, I jumped at it. And I had no idea what was in store for me. I learned
Mm-hmm.
very quickly that there were definitely some things I was not good at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that were not suited to my strengths. And I learned pretty quickly. I am not one for compliance or anything that's related, and probably a good thing I didn't go into financial services. I much prefer the marketing and creativity behind that. But every time there was an opportunity, so I spent 8 years with one company, and then I was recruited to go work for Gallo, and I spent 6 years with Gallo, including time on the Central Coast,
Mm-hmm.
which was incredible. And then eventually, I got to a point in my career, had some, of course, had some missteps along the way, as we all do, and got to a point in my career where I was able to start working part time with an organization called WISE,
Mm-hmm.
which stands for
Mm-hmm.
Wine Industry Sales Education. And so I was working part time with them and fractional general manager for small brands that didn't need a full time executive. And so now I was going from with WISE coaching wineries or teaching classes in person about how to work in tasting rooms, how to manage direct to consumer businesses, uh, and keeping it real by actually being a GM of a winery and experiencing all the things that were happening in real time. So it
Yeah.
kept me relevant.
Totally, totally. And I think there are a couple of, I guess, cultural examples really that I think I'd invite you to flesh out a little bit more. You've mentioned influences of people like Danny Meyer, Will
Yeah,
Guidara, and
yeah.
genuine hospitality. And I just wonder, yeah, well, yeah, maybe flesh those out for us, and maybe talk to where does that fit into the story.
Yeah, so I well, let's back up. So I met my husband shortly after I moved to the Napa Valley, the old-fashioned way. I met him at a brew pub, uh, and kind of, he was across the bar and I was on one side of the bar. He was on the other side of the bar. He was managing that brewery,
Hmm.
and uh, became a regular and kept going in and seeing him and met him. And as his career progressed in hospitality, so too did mine. And he started reading and listening to a lot of thought leaders like Danny Meyer or Will Guidara,
Hmm.
and really turned me on to some of that thinking. So pillow talk at our house is a little unusual. He is now yeah, he is now a professor at the Culinary Institute of America. And so when he sees a video or reads an article or a book, or they're teaching something in class, we'll talk about, or he had a hospitality moment with his students. We'll talk about that, and I get excited about an experience I had with a winery, and we talk about those things. I feel so bad for our daughter. We have a 20-year-old, and she's grown up. This poor child cannot go into a restaurant or into a winery without being primed for the hospitality
Mm, hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
But those were some of the things that definitely influenced my thinking. And then just had the opportunity to work with incredible people throughout the years as well. Some phenomenal people who really challenged my thinking,
Hmm.
particularly at Gallo, after going into a larger organization like that, with some of the best and the absolute brightest minds in wine marketing and in winemaking, frankly, too. Um, some of those people, I cherished those relationships, and I cherished how they influenced how I approach a brand or how I approach a guest experience. They taught me so much there.
Yeah, yeah, and it, arguably that's the sort of difficult way around, to go from a smaller entity, to go from a small
Hmm.
into a larger entity, and what some of the reasons that are often quoted is that there are a lot of other cultural elements that you have to work within, and bigger structures and bigger teams, and I guess unseen complexity besides actually just doing the job, which again, coming and getting your grounding on a much smaller, much more more transparent, let's say, type of culture, that couldn't be a challenge, is yeah, the perceived wisdom,
Yeah.
let's say.
Yeah, going from working for one brand, I'm part of a larger portfolio,
Mm,
but the first company that I worked for had, one brand in the United States, and
mhm.
then going to be one of several brands of Gallo. I was like, "Oh, this is a very different very different experience." Highly recommended at some point just to get that perspective.
Mhm,
Anyone
mhm,
young in their
mhm,
career,
mhm.
by all means, take those risks, take those chances, and just absorb everything you can. Be an active participant in your career. And I soaked up so much during those
Yeah,
years.
yeah. No, it really does sound as though, and I think it's almost as though, that example you gave earlier of, just going in at the deep end, taking the responsibility, um, you know, putting your hand up when there's something new to learn, and kind of figuring it out. I think that's a solid base.
Mhm,
But I think that the part of the story there that I would like to explore a little bit more is, and I think
mhm,
it does definitely relate to Wise, and the work that you're currently doing at
mhm.
Wise, is actually then taking hospitality, which I think, again, on the face of it, and I think to the layman, and I'm the layman here. I'm here representing the layman. I think on the face of it, so much of it is about the individual, is about the face to face contact. The
Mhm.
warmth, the words that are spoken there. But you've, again, through your husband, and through your own studies and your own qualifications, you've had to, I guess, distill the back end of that, right? You've had to get under the hood of it, and unpack the
Yeah.
science, and figure out why things work, and teach the best practice. So I wonder, really big question, but again, for a layman like myself, how do you sort of reconcile that personal element of hospitality that only we'll see, versus
Mhm.
the kind of the taught, the learned part of hospitality?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is one thing that I have learned that I absolutely cannot train, and I've been doing training and coaching. Why I started in 2008, and I did some of the early work then, and then
Hmm.
came back into the business in 2016. So almost 10 years ago, I came into it again. And through the years, both in my own practice when I was hiring, as well as when I was coaching others on hiring, the one thing that I cannot train for is hospitality heart.
Hmm.
The person that you're interviewing, the candidate that you're thinking about bringing into your business, has to have a love of people and a love of service and a love of hospitality. I've tried. I've had some people who have just phenomenal resumes. They've worked at some of the best restaurants in the world. They've worked at some of the best wineries in the world, uh, and they just don't have that warmth. They can
Hmm.
technically they can do the job. They can do the job very very well from a technical perspective. They know how to lay the plate right. They know how to open the bottle correctly. They know how all the technical components of
Hmm.
service.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
when it comes to hospitality, there's tests you can do. I have people watch a YouTube video and tell me a very specific one, a TED talk. Tell me about a time that you experienced hospitality like this. How did you feel? Tell me about a time when you've delivered hospitality like that. How did you feel? what happened with the guest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's that component. And then there's also,
Mm-hmm.
especially in direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who works facing the consumer in the wine space, there's a salesmanship component to this, or salesperson component.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, are you excited about making those connections? And at Wise, we believe that sales comes through superb service. We have to be technically delivering a very sound experience with that warm hospitality. But then there's a professionalism that comes with that comfort and confidence and being able to ask for the order, to invite people to join your wine club, to invite them to your mailing list and to keep in touch. And so we really focus in on, okay, you have the hospitality heart, which we can't train for, but
Yeah.
we can train for the sales skills. So let's focus on making that better. And that's, you mentioned ag tourism earlier. It's critical. It is absolutely critical to our rural communities. And we need to professionalize it more and more.
Yeah, and it was something I actually meant to sort of pick up earlier, but I still think it's very relevant. I mean, do we know that there are now, or the people who are being attracted to wine country, are they markedly different from the ones that you were meeting when you kind of first started?
The guests are more and more sophisticated.
Hmm.
So through the information age, right? They have every tasting note, they have every ratings and review score
Mm.
available to them on their device. And so they're doing that research going in. They don't There's robust websites. There are, ways, hopefully people are on podcasts. Hopefully people are out there talking about their wines. Wineries are out there talking about their wines.
Hmm.
So the consumer can, if they research, they can find all that. Whereas years ago, they didn't have easy access to that. And so the role of the host was to just tell the brand story and tell people what they were tasting and tell them these were the scores. Now that has evolved significantly to where the guest is looking for more. And we call it edutained. They want to be
Hmm.
educated on
Hmm.
one hand and entertained on the other hand. We've got to find out what's important to them. How much research did they do? What do they already know? Where can we fill in the gaps? Where can we give them that experience that they're not going to get from research? It goes back to that hospitality moment. And there are wineries that are doing a phenomenal job of tailoring every experience. We call it mass customization. They're
Hmm.
tailoring
Hmm.
every
Hmm.
experience to the guest. The staff know exactly what they're empowered to do. There is no ambiguity, and they're enabled to do it in that interaction with that guest. But then they do it with their next guest or their next table over and over again. And those are the wineries that are thriving.
And even just from a sort of a geographical point of view, presumably the origin and where people have traveled from nowadays is completely different. We've probably gone from a black and white to a color plasma screen and widescreen. Is it that much of a difference?
Absolutely, absolutely. 20 years ago, when I think back to what Oregon or Washington looked like,
Hmm.
or my home state, Michigan, what that looked like, New York, Virginia, Maryland, Texas, all these incredible states. They all now, every state in the U.S. has a wine country. Every
Mm-hmm.
state is producing wine in the United States. And so, how do we tap into authentic moments with our guests who are perhaps more local? It's not all destination based where somebody is or guests are coming out for 3 or 4 days and they've come from several states away. Now maybe they're day tripping from their local neighborhood
Hmm.
an hour or two away from their home to go have these fantastic experiences. And I've had just amazing experiences in other states where the wines are sound. They're very good. And there may not be the things that, as someone who's lived in the Napa Valley most of her life, that I may not be accustomed to.
Yeah.
But boy, I will tell you, go have an experience in Texas. The wines and the hospitality will absolutely knock your boots off. It's quite the experience.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we spoke before about Texas, and just to riff on that, I actually I appeared on the Texas Wine podcast a few years ago now, and speaking about the amount of wine that is made in Texas is a decent amount in and of itself.
Hmm.
From memory, it was something like the sixth or seventh largest production in all of those states that you mentioned. But the fact that I think it was something like 93% of it doesn't leave the state. So not even that 93% of it doesn't leave the United States. 93% of it doesn't leave Texas. So there's a tiny amount getting outside, and a splash is making it into international markets, isn't it?
Yeah. And even to drill even further than that,
Yeah.
only a splash of that is making it to local retailers in Texas or local restaurants in
Ah,
Texas.
okay.
And so
Okay.
it truly is a cellar door experience.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
truly
Mm-hmm.
is those experiences on property. That's what's driving it, which is a shame because I've had some pretty fun wines in Texas. I will tell you. Think Spanish varietals, think Italian varietals. I've definitely had some fun stuff in Texas, and loved it.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting one because I have spoken before with the guys who look after the wine routes, and I've sort of done a little bit of
Mhm.
research on that, and I think in a way it's I think it's how it's positioned, right? It's like, actually, if you're maybe British, let's say, and you're thinking, okay, I want to go to the States, the language, the flights are usually not overly expensive,
Mhm.
and accessible, and it feels familiar in a lot of ways. I think that could be a big draw. It just says, okay, look, if you have you like those exclusive experiences that you can kind of brag about when you come home. What could be sort of more brag worthy than you're not gonna see this wine back home. You might take a couple of bottles back with you, but they'll probably be the only ones in the country. It's a
Right.
real, you've got to get there. It's destination tourism, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it can't be outsourced. Destination
Yeah.
tourism is here in our communities, and it's so much more than just the winery. It's the hotels, it's the restaurants, it's the farmers, and then the direct wages that go into fueling those
Mm.
communities.
Hmm.
It's exponential, and it's important to those communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, again, I'm loving these asides. We're obviously both very passionate about the product, about the wine industry. But take us back really to the story, and take us back to joining Wise. I mean, what
Yeah.
give us the picture of what Wise was when you joined, and when you kind of really decided to kind of go for it, and give us a sense of how that has developed, and the impact that you've made over that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I met our co-founder years before she started Wise. And when she was leaving Harvard Business School, she was going off to start one of the first wine direct to consumer catalogs,
Hmm.
Ambrosia Wine Catalog. And then that grew into a fulfillment company called Wine Tasting Network. She eventually sold that. And as soon as she sold that, her phone started ringing off the hook. So this is circa 2007, 2008. Her phone was ringing off the hook with wineries calling her saying, "We need help.
Hmm.
There's got to be a better way." And so she had the idea to launch Wise, really focusing on what if we tried in direct to consumer? What if we actually tried to sell wine, to sell club, to build our brands instead of being transactional? A guest comes in, they buy a couple of
Hmm.
bottles,
Hmm.
into
Hmm.
more of a relationship driven model to where you were now entering into a relationship. So she was going through that evolution as I was peeling off and leaving one winery and then going to work for another. And she said, "Hey, as you've got a little." I had banked up vacation time. I'd
Hmm.
never taken vacation, and it was the holidays, and so I had a couple of weeks. And she said, "Can you help me, develop some content? Can you help me put some of this together?" And so it started with that, and thinking about what do I want people in tasting rooms and in wine clubs who work in there know? What do I want
Hmm.
them to know? How do
Hmm.
I want,
Hmm.
how can they be more successful? And so some of that initial early content, we stayed in touch over the years. And as I emerged from an opportunity, she said, "Hey, do you want to come work part time with Wise? Do you want to be more impactful instead of just behind the curtains, creating some content, writing some things, do you want to actually be out there coaching wineries and teaching wineries what you've learned over the years? And so that started that evolution. And after, last year was my 25th year in the industry, I stepped back from doing this
Mm,
part-time
mhm,
fractional
mhm,
general management, and was able to go full time with Wise. And she invited me, as well as a long-term employee, a gal by the name of Jennifer Warrington. She invited us in to be partners in the business. And it's so exciting to work with these two incredible women who want nothing but the best for wineries and wine regions. And our approach is it's not a one size fits all. We
mhm,
have
mhm,
to platinum rule, and
mm,
we have to adapt to the winery in front of us. What are their strengths? What are they really good at? What is their core equity? How can we help coach them to be even better and take it to the next level and raise the bar? And when we raise the bar for one winery and the experience and the metrics, then another winery feels it, and another winery, and then all of a sudden, not only is the winery thriving, but regions are thriving.
mhm, mhm,
And so to me, I think I've finally found my life's purpose
mhm, mhm.
in enabling wineries and wine regions to be economically successful, and successful with their guests. And so I'm in my happy place.
Yeah.
Took a few years to get here, but I'm definitely in my happy place.
No, it's absolutely brilliant, and I think, for there's so much that, there's just, so much to unpack. I think in many of the examples that you've given there, and I just think that, even I always just think of that calculation of following the dollar. If you've
Mhm.
got a winery that's selling off site, and they need to share their margins, and they need to share their their profits right the way down the value chain. If you've got somebody who's selling it themselves direct to consumer, that is obviously a much better deal for the winery themselves, but it's a much better deal for the local community as well, isn't it? Because there's more there for the people working there. There's just, more investment going into the product, and what they're actually selling in the first place.
Yeah, and the winery is able to control the experience,
Hmm.
and they're able to have to share parts of it. Maybe there's something that is deeply rooted in that winery family that they want to share, and that's what sets them apart. And they're able to do that with their guests, who are then taking it back to their communities. And we've seen so many examples of that, where there are maybe it's a tradition, or something that is served or enjoyed, that they then get to share back. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And to your point, taking that bottle of wine that you found from this winery where none of it
Hmm.
ever leaves the winery, the
Yeah.
state, let alone retail. That's really cool.
Yeah, it completely is, and I think, again, it's just one of those ways in which I think wine just wins. Why,
Mhm.
again, I think we've got something very special. I was actually just having this conversation before we joined with another friend, and I'm um, I started the podcast actually with watching a lot of Gary Vaynerchuk videos.
Yes.
Back in the day, he was somebody who I joined kind of his tribe, let's say, when he was in
Hmm.
business mode. Really, I didn't really know him too
Yeah.
much in wine mode, but he always had this saying, which is that there are two ways to build the biggest building in town, and way one is to go around and tear everyone else's towers down, and then if you keep doing that, then
Mhm.
eventually you'll have the biggest tower in town. Or let's just build the biggest tower in town, guys. Let's not look around. Let's not think about kind of what else is out there. And I
Yeah.
really just hope that wine is doing enough of the second part of just trying to build the biggest tower. Again, I've just come back from Oregon, and I sense that there is a lot of fear around what the sort of neo prohibitionist movement, and the Surgeon
Yeah.
General is saying. I could sort of feel the ripples, and I almost just wanted to kind of put my arms around the whole industry, and that was what I was really trying to promote and talk about in my talk there is just, guys, you're amazing. You've all got incredible stories that actually, are. I think that they really can position wine in its rightful place, and it doesn't have to just be around knocking back the latest negative message about wine. It can be just about, we're amazing. There's so much more that we can be telling you, and we'd love to be able to tell you just that.
Yeah, I had early on in my career, I had the opportunity to get involved with an organization in the States called Women for Wine Sense.
Mm,
And it was really started 30 some odd years ago around the initial neo-prohibitionists that were saying wine is bad.
hmm
And right around that time, 60 Minutes did a spotlight special on the French paradox.
hmm
And it
hmm
really started to kind of turn the tide around, healthy consumption.
Yeah.
Obviously not overindulging, but healthy consumption. Moderate can be a part of a healthy lifestyle. And there were some, you go back and you look at who started Women for Wine Sense, just some fantastic leaders of the industry, but also people who are aficionados, women and men
hmm
who love drinking wine and learning about wine. I was honored to serve on their national board of directors for a couple of years and help grow that mission. And one hope that I have is that, particularly with the wholesale organizations and the direct to consumer, is that we can start to collaborate more and we can start working more together. And organizations like Women for Wine Sense can help us bridge that gap so that it's the entire industry coming together, aficionados and those of us in the industry, wholesale and direct to consumer, and all of us having a united voice and a united front.
hmm
There are definitely headwinds facing our industry, but we've been here before. We've had other headwinds that have faced us before, and we've come out of it okay. We went through prohibition and we came out of it. It was remarkably different after, but
Yeah.
there are, if we are rowing in the same direction, if we're swimming in the same direction and working with each other, we stand a far better chance of being successful. And I do want to say, Gary Vaynerchuk's book, I got to plug his book, The
Yeah.
Thank You Economy. I
Uh-huh.
highly recommend when you talk about thought leaders, for sure.
Yeah, he's just been, so consistent, let's say, and
Mhm.
yeah, I think as has been quite a visionary, and really anyone listening, because I still meet a lot of people that only know him from his wine library TV, but he's gone on to a whole other trajectory. Still loves the wine, but yeah, there's
Mhm.
so much, I think, great knowledge, and I think one of the things that I love that he says, and I think it's relevant to our conversation as well, is that he says that actually social media, is it changing us, or is it just exposing us? Is it kind of amplifying what we do? And I think there's a point there for wine brands as well. But I pick up sometimes that it's sort of treated as are we doing in person and personal, or are we doing social media? It's like sort of digital and in person, and that kind of never the twain shall meet. Um,
Mhm.
and I had again, during the presentation, we had some interesting questions on this, and one of the things that I would just reinforce, and I would just encourage all wineries to think about, is just the definition of the term event. I feel as though the boundaries in a lot of people's minds are very fixed around what an event is and what it looks like, and that it happens on a particular day at a particular time, and it takes a lot of effort to plan and to sell tickets and to produce and
Mhm.
to give people an amazing experience. But that, in our busy days, an event can be a video from the vineyard. That can be something that takes us out of our a little cubicle, or our dreary grey skied London, and kind of transports us to Napa, or to Texas, or to New Mexico, or to Oregon, to anywhere in
Mhm.
the world, and just um I believe that thinking in more in that direction, that there are thousands of events that we can be having, micro events almost, it just gives
Yeah.
us so much more opportunities to tell our story and just bring more people into this incredible world that is wine.
One of the things we're exploring right now and working with a number of wineries on is doing roadshow events.
Mm,
So getting out of your winery and going to where your guests are, going to where your fans are. So maybe going and doing an in market or in home tasting or
hmm
in an
hmm
at a restaurant. So again, that's that collaboration between the retail and the wholesale world and the direct to consumer world coming together and doing things like that. We're seeing wineries travel with their wine club members and their
hmm
biggest fans.
hmm
And so they're going, to Italy, or they're doing
mm,
river cruising through Europe or
hmm
wherever.
hmm hmm
It's looking for those shared experiences. So if your winemaker is really excited about Italian varietals, taking your wine club members and your winemaker and letting her walk you through Italy and some of the things that she's most excited about. And there are companies that plan all that for wineries. So it's meeting guests where they are. The big event, yes, you can have the grand
mm,
tours. You can
hmm
do the 200 person, at your winery releases and experiences. But what about more one-to-one? Or what about more small group experiences? And I love the social media component.
hmm
That's one way to get the winery out there, and go global. Here's a walk in the vineyard. Oh, look, bud break is happening,
Yeah.
or here's a bunny running through our field or whatever it is. We can talk about regenerative farming, or we can show the lambs doing the regenerative farming.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, who wouldn't want to see a lamb, a cute lamb popping up on their on their feed? Um, well, there's a few questions that I have, and again, I feel like there's so much that I kind of want to know about whys and about
Yeah.
how you sort of do your work. But something that's just really coming to mind, just I think off the back of the things that you've described there, and I believe that the way that you teach and the way that you sort of bring together different wineries on different courses is do you have a view around, and presumably the topic does come up when you're maybe teaching mixed groups around competition, because I've always felt that it's always been a little bit, I would personally, I've seen it as not always being um people working together. I feel as though, and maybe it is a sort of this is our spot of land, and this is where we make our wine, and we're rightfully proud of our wine, and we want you to buy our wine rather than the wine of the person next door. I'm just curious, does that kind of collaborative versus competitive dynamic, does that come up, and what are
Yeah.
maybe some of the takeaways or common themes that come up during those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Wise is invited into a region, so for example, when I was in New Mexico last week, my partner Jen and I went and we tasted at 8 wineries
Hmm
out of the 50 in the state. We tasted at 8 that were kind of close to where we were in Albuquerque, and we definitely felt the local pride
mm
uh, coming through in each of our experiences. And so when we're invited into a region and we're working, with a group of wineries for one area, I'm very keen to remind, especially the frontline tasting room staff who are interacting with the guests, you work for more than one brand. Yes, you work for your winery brand, and you need to be telling your brand story and what differentiates you from the winery down the street. And by the way, if you are a small family owned winery making world class wines from world class grapes, I've heard that story a few times. So let's find out what truly makes you unique. But then I ask them to take a step back and I remind them that they actually work for 2 brands. And they also, in that example, they worked for the wines of New Mexico. They
hmm
worked for the
hmm
state.
hmm
That's their other brand. So that regional pride really needs to come through. And so you're talking to a guest and you're finding out that they're from out of state. Tourism drives $8 billion in direct spend in New Mexico, for example. I then found that the wine industry, these 50 wineries generated an $1 billion of economic impact, either through direct wages, through incremental spending, through tourism, through all those
Incredible,
other things
incredible.
for 50 wineries. And so I pull this, I get their economic impact reports and I read those before I go present. So when I'm working with a region, I'm always reminding them of that. And then in a mixed, like in a Zoom classroom, a synchronous Zoom that may go for 5 or 6 sessions, 3 hours a session, and we talk about branding in that particular relevant coursework, we also talk about how important their region's brand is and the
Mm-hmm.
power of
Mm-hmm.
collaboration. None of us is successful. None of us can have the draw as a standalone individual winery. It's when there are multiples and we create that pull and we
Yeah.
create those experiences for guests to come to. We're far better off when we collaborate together. And when we get a guest in the tasting room, say, "Oh, let me call my buddy down the street at this winery," or, "Oh, where you should go is over here." We've even seen, and I love this idea,
Mm, mm,
wineries promoting other wineries through the slow months. So January, February, March here in the United States, very traditionally slow for direct to consumer. Uh, doing, instead of dry January, doing try January. So as a member of our wine club A over here, you can go to winery B over there,
yeah.
and for the month of January, receive club member benefits. And so that collaboration and that cross pollination. And a wine drinker is a wine drinker. And so building that loyalty and giving them even more of a reason to come back to your region, because now they're members of 2 clubs in the neighborhood or 3 clubs in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the power of that collaboration that we're seeing that's working really, really well. So whether it's, regional work or whether it's individual work and we're talking about their own brand, how they can collaborate and be successful.
Yep. And I love it. I really do. I saw that firsthand back in 2020 when
Mhm.
I went to Oregon and interviewed a sort of 16 or 17 winemakers, and really without any kind of prompting from myself, they started talking about each other's wineries. They said, "Oh, and that is not common. I know it. I've interviewed maybe 250, 300 winemakers, and most of the time it's, let's focus on our story. Let's sort of have a captive audience for our brand story. And I could not agree more. I think that is the secret sauce. And I do have empathy though, because it feels counterintuitive to be shining the spotlight on another wine brand, and your wine club membership,
Mhm.
that sort of ninja move, next level. But as you
Mhm.
say, even just that simple call up, or telling a story about a great experience that they've had in another winery, they're going to go, somebody's coming down, they're not just going to go to one winery, they're going to go to multiple wineries. And
Mhm.
you build so much trust, don't you, by you say, okay, you should go and check out these guys, tell them I sent you. And
Yeah.
just build that community. People like that. That is just, that's just old school being nice, right? That's just being a good neighbor.
Well, and that's hospitality too, right? Let me call ahead for you.
Yeah.
Let me help you with your itinerary. Uh, you've placed a high level in trust in me as your
Hmm.
host.
Hmm.
So let me help you, and you've had a great time with me. I'm going to send you to places that I think you'll like based on your palate and your preferences. I love that collaboration. I love that when I experience that as I go into a winery and I mystery shop a winery and they don't know
Mm.
that I'm in the
Hmm.
industry,
Hmm.
and I'm posing as a guest, and I have those real genuine interactions with the host and watching them get so excited and so passionate about where else maybe that host is a wine club member, what else they're
Hmm.
drinking.
Hmm. Hmm.
Winemakers, they drink other people's wine, keeps their palates fresh. Same in the
Yeah.
tasting room.
Yeah. Are there any other, let's say, opportunities that come to mind? Things that, like the competition, like working collaboratively with your competition. Anything, other things that come to mind that you think, okay, maybe some wineries initially they see this as quite counterintuitive, but once they've spent time with you and you've maybe unpacked it for them and they've gotten maybe a bit more familiar with it, it actually can be something that they can turn to their advantage.
Yeah, I think that for a long time, there was, this, oh, we don't want to promote our direct to consumer. It's an afterthought.
Mm,
The tasting room is a cost center. It's not a profit center. And there was, we're a wholesale brand. We're focused on building our relationships out of market. And one of the studies that I've always found fascinating, and I really wanted to dive into, and someday I'll do this, but I wanted to overlay where wineries, and there is actually a company that does this now.
Hmm.
I want to overlay where wineries have wholesale distribution. Do they have strong consumer pull as well? So, for example, if I have a wine club member that lives, let's say, in Denver, Colorado, and I've got some key placements in some key accounts in Denver, are my wine club members buying my wine when they go to a restaurant by the glass? Because it's a brand they're familiar with, because it's a story they know, because it's something they trust, because they came to the winery and had an experience. So I would love to see more collaboration between wholesale and direct to consumer, which there's always been a wall between those two.
Mm.
And I think that there needs to be more collaboration between those two, where they are embracing each other, and not looking at it as, that they're working against each other because it's a small finite pie. No, it's not a small finite pie. Have an abundance mentality when it comes to collaborating and working together, so that when a guest goes and they see a brand on a wine list, or they see it in store, they pick it up because maybe it's not included in their wine club shipments, or maybe it's something that
Hmm.
is a second line that's made by that brand, or whatever it is. But I've always wanted to explore that topic further. There's finally a company that's just starting to overlay those two things, so we can see that now, and then come up with strategy around it. So making a data driven decision
Hmm.
with a little bit of good old gut instinct in there, to push that spirit of collaboration further.
Yeah, I've got to say, I've had a fabulous experience at the Oregon Wine Symposium, and we've been kind of talking since then, and you've really opened my eyes to, I think, a whole series of marketing and training and development events that take place every year in California,
Mhm.
in Texas, in New Mexico, in all of the winemaking states around Washington. I know they have theirs as well. And
Mhm.
I want to say, I'm so impressed by that, by that investment, because it is a huge investment. It is a huge investment of time as well, to have all of those good folk come down and spend time in the classroom, away from the vineyard, and away from the probably 101 other things that they could be doing back at the farm. And I just think it's
Yeah.
I just think it's a long-term play. And I just think it's really it tells its own story, that a company like Wise is having that success as well, and is getting that message out there. And and again, the more that I see of what you're putting out there, I'm really happy that we got to speak, really. And I'm just really feel as though that is all pulling in the right direction, really, about giving people the skills that they need to be able to at least have a solid foundation to build from in what are, I think, some challenging times for everyone in hospitality.
Yeah, and I hope that, winery, I know you have a large global reach. I hope that wineries in other countries, Europe, Australia is
Hmm.
already doing it, New Zealand is doing it, but certainly Europe. I hope that there is some consideration of direct to consumer,
Mm.
and in
Hmm.
growing those efforts, and taking some very calculated risks. And I hope to see you at the Direct to Consumer Symposium next year. It'll be in January, but to be in a room, a conference center of 700 professionals devoted to nothing but wine direct to consumer.
Mm. Hmm.
I think you'd find
Hmm.
it absolutely fascinating. And we'll go taste some wine while you're here.
Yeah.
We can have some experiences.
Yeah, I honestly, it really did. I think it was the right first step, Oregon, and
Mhm.
you've really, yeah, expanded my mind. And yeah, it's already on my my vision board for next year is definitely to be involved. And again, I really think that this type of conversation and what I presented, and the types of
Mhm.
models, I just think that we need to be empathetic. When we, maybe, as you say, you see a website that looks like it's from 20 from last century. Making wine is a tough business. People have got sometimes two full-time jobs, and I
Or
think,
more.
yeah,
Yes.
at least, for
Yes.
starters.
And I just think that, yeah, everybody doesn't need to go and make wine. I think, I'm certainly far away from making wine. I don't know if you are as well, but, I think the things
No,
that
I think that's for the professionals. I think that's for the professionals.
Exactly. And, I think the things that we're specializing in, the things that we're passionate about, and I think the things that can give wineries and give regions leverage, I just think that again, in our modern day, with our, fast changing consumer, they're so important. And I think that in and of itself is another way for collaboration. It's like that those what were seen as soft skills, perhaps they actually have a hard underpinning, if you're able to track the data.
Absolutely.
In closing, then, I would love to give you the opportunity just to point the listeners towards any particular resources or any particular locations and coordinates on the web where they can learn more about Wise, about yourself, and about the successes that you're having.
Yeah, I would love to invite people to check out our website, www.wineindustrySalesEducation.com. We did go out and buy the longest URL we could find. And then we have a blog on our website that has been, we post 1 to 2 times a month. And you can search all the way back to our archives. I think we go all the way back to maybe 2010. But we post, it's all direct to consumer. And so if someone is just thinking about getting started or refining, we have a number of topics. There's a chat function on there. It'll get you right to me or to some of my colleagues. And we're happy to answer any questions you have around getting into direct to consumer or expanding your direct to consumer efforts and energy. And I have a list of, low cost or free training materials that I'm happy to send anyone, including some of my favorite books that we've talked about and my favorite podcasts as well. So I'm happy to share those. But I just, let's help raise the tide for all wineries. Let's connect.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Liz Mercer, partner of Wise. Visit wineindustrysaleseducation.com, the link is below, where you can learn more and read the blog that Liz mentioned on the podcast. And why not reach out to Liz via the chat function on the Wise website to let her know what you thought of the episode and ask any questions it might have raised. Next time on Interpreting Wine's Mosaic of Wine Series 2 in episode 583, I'll be speaking with Anne McHale, Master of Wine. Make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when that series episode goes live. And if you're not already, why not follow along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter X, and hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.